Recording in progress. Boker Tov, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Welcome to everyone joining us on Zoom, on Facebook, YouTube, and people filtering in person. So nice to be with you again on the Shabbat Parsha Pinchas, and 4th of July weekend. We begin our services with Moda'ani, the prayer of thankfulness for another day. Moda'ani on page 186. Turn 2 pages for Matovu. Turn to page 194 for Asher Yatzar, the prayer of thanks for our physical bodies. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher yatzar et ha'adam b'chachma, u'varei bo nekavim chalulim chalulihim. Galui v'yadu lifnei kisei kivodecha, she'im yiftach echad mehem, o yistam echad mehem, אי אפשר להתקיים ולעמוד לפניך Baruch atah Adonai, rofei kol basar umafli la'asot.
Amen.
We turn the page for Elohai Neshama.
Neshama shenatata bi tehora hi Elohai Neshama shenatata bi tehora hi Ata perata, ata yetzata, ata nefachta bi, ve'ata mishamra b'kirbi, ve'ata atir litla mimeni ulechazira b'letinavo. Kol zeman sheneshama b'kirbi, Modani lefanecha, kol zeman sheneshama b'kirbi, modani lefanecha. Adonai Elohai v'Elohei avotai. Adonai Elohai v'Elohei imotai. Ribon kol ha'masim, Adon kol haneshama.
We turn the page to 198 for the daily miracles, and we recall the words of Albert Einstein that we can either live our lives as if nothing is a miracle or as if everything is.
Baruch atah Adonai asher beyado nefesh kol chai v'ruach kol basarish. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has given the mind the ability to distinguish day from night.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who opens the eyes of the blind.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who frees the captive.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who lifts up the fallen.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who stretches the earth over the waters.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who strengthens our steps.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who clothes the naked.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who gives strength to the weary.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who removes sleep from the eyes, slumber from the eyelids.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has made me in the image of God.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has made me free.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has made me a Jew.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who girds Israel with strength.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who crowns Israel with splendor.
Amen.
We turn to page 204 for the blessing for the study of Torah, keeping in mind the centrality of the idea of study within the Jewish tradition. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kishanu mitzvotanu v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Ve'arevna Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratecha b'finu, b'fi amcha beit Yisrael nehiyeh anachnu v'titzoenu, v'titzoei amcha beit Yisrael kulanu yodim shemecha, v'lo dei Toratecha lishmaha. Baruch atah Adonai Hamilamed Torah li'amo Yisrael.
Amen.
These are the things that are limitless, of which a person enjoys the fruit of the world, while the principle remains in the world to come. They are honoring one's parents, engaging in deeds of compassion, arriving early for study morning and evening, dealing graciously with guests, visiting the sick, providing for the wedding couple, and accompanying the dead for burial, being devoted in prayer, and making peace among people. The Talmud Torah keneged kulam. The study of Torah encompasses them all. We turn for Baruch She'amar on page 212.
Baruch She'amar v'haya haolam Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo Baruch Chaseh Bereshit Baruch Omer ve'oseh Baruch Koser u'mekayem Baruch merachem al haaretz Baruch merachem al habriyot Baruch meshalem Zachar tov lireav Baruch ha'elad v'kayam lanetzach Baruch podeh u'matzil Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo With songs of praise we extol you and proclaim your sovereignty, for you are the source of life in the universe. One God, life of the universe, praised and glorious ruler, your name is eternal. Melech mehulal, batishbachot. Melech mehulal, batishbachot. Baruch atah Adonai, Melech mehulal, batishbachot.
We turn the page for Mizmor Shir Liyom HaShabbat.
Mizmor Shir Leyom HaShabbat Mizmor Shir Leyom HaShabbat Mizmor Shir Leyom HaShabbat Ay lay 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 Mizmor Shir Leyom HaShabbat Mizmor Shir Leyom HaShabbat Mizmor Shir Leyom HaShabbat Ay lay 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 Tov lehodot l'Adonai ולזמר
flip to page 215 for Ashrei and reflect on how happy and praiseworthy we are to be able to dwell in a house and community such as our own.
Ashrei yoshvei bitecha, od yahalelu chasela. Ashrei yoshvei bitecha, od yahalelu chasela. Ashrei, ashrei yoshvei bitecha, od yahalelu, od yahalelu chasela. Ashrei yoshvei bitecha, od yahalelu chasela. Ashrei yoshvei bitecha, od yahalelu chasela. Ashrei, ashrei yoshvei bitecha, od yahalelu, od yahalelu chasela. Ashrei, ashrei yoshvei bitecha, od yahalelu, od yahalelu chasela.
Tehillat ledabira mimcha lahaya melech v'abrav shimcha le'olam va'ed.
בכל יום אברכך והללה שמך לעולם ועד.
Gadol Adonai u'me'olal me'od, guli tolato en cheker.
דור לדור ישבח מעשיך וגבורותיך יגידו.
Hadar kevod ha'odecha, v'regi v'nifotecha asicha.
ועזוז נורותיך יאמרו וגדולתך אספרנה.
Zecher rav tucha yabi'u, v'tzidkecha yiranenu.
חנון ורחום אדוני, ערך אפיים וגדול חסד.
Tov Adonai la'akol, v'rachamav al kol ma'asav.
יודוך אדוני כל מעשיך וחסידיך יברכוך.
Kevod malchuto yameru, ugvaratecha yidaberu.
להודיע לבני האדם גבורותיו וכבוד אדר מלכותו.
Malchutecha malchut kol ha'olamim, u'mashatecha b'chol dor v'dor.
סומך אדוני לכל הנופלים וזוקף לכל הכפופים.
Enei koelach yisaberu, ve'ata noten lahem et achlem be'ito.
פותח את ידיך ומשביע לכל חי רצון.
Tzadik Adonai b'chol derachav, v'chasid b'chol ma'asav.
קרוב אדוני לכל קוראיו, לכל אשר יקראוהו באמת.
Ratzon yoriyav ya'aseh, ve'et shavatam yishma v'yoshiyim.
שומר אדוני את כל אוהביו ואת כל רשעים ישמיד.
Tehillat Adonai yidabir pi, v'yivrach kol basar shem kadsho li'olam va'ed.
ואנחנו נברך יה מעתה ועד עולם.
Hallelujah. We turn the page to 218 for Hallelujah.
כל הנשמה תהלליה, הללו, הללויה. כל הנשמה תהלליה, הללו, הללויה. הללו, הללו, הללו. הללו, הללו, הללו. הללו, הללו,
נשמת כל חי תברש את שמך, אדוני אלוהינו ורוח כל בשר, תבאר בתרומם זכרך מלכנו תמיד. We turn to 220 for Ilufinu.
Ilufinu, male shira kayam, ולשוננו רינה, וידינו פרוסות כנשרי שמיים, ורגלינו קלות כאיילות. אילופינו מלא שירה קיים, ולשוננו רינה, וידינו פרוסות כנשרי שמיים, ורגלינו קלות כאיילות. אין אנחנו מספיקים להודות לך ולברך את שמך מלכנו. אין אנחנו מספיקים להודות לך ולברך את שמך מלך מלכי המלכים, מלך מלכי המלכים, מלך מלכי המלכים. אילופינו לשירה קיים, ולשוננו רינה, וידינו פרוסות כנשרי שמיים, ורגלינו קלות כאיילות.
For every mouth will acknowledge you, and every tongue pledge homage to you. Every knee bend in your presence, every upright person shall bow before you. Every heart will revere you, and every innermost thought will sing to your name. And David said, let all my bones exclaim, who is like you, Adonai? As David continued, bless Adonai, O my soul, and let my inner being praise your holy name. We turn for Shochenad on 222.
שוכנת מרום וקדוש שמו, וכתוב רננו צדיקים באדוני, לישרים נבתילה, בפי ישרים תתהלל, ובדברי צדיקים תתברך, ובלשון חסידים תתרומם, ובקרב קדושים תתקדש. במקלות ובריבות עמך בית ישראל, ורינה יתברך שמך מלכנו, בכל דור ודור. ישתבח שמך לעד מלכנו, האל המלך הגדול והקדוש בשמיים ובארץ. כי לך נאה אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו ואמותינו, שושבחה הלב וזמרה, עוז וממשלה, נצח גדולה גבורה, תהילה ותפארת, קדושה ומלכות, ברכות והודאות, מעתה ועד עולם. ברוך אתה אדוני, אל מלך גדול ותשבחות, אל ההודאות אדון הנפלאות, הבוחר בשירי זמרה, מלך מלכי העולמים.
Please rise in person or in spirit for Kaddish on 224.
ועמדי ורח חירותי וימליך מלכותי, וחי יכונו יום יכון, וחיי דרכו בית ישראל. בעגלה, בעגלה, ובזמן קריב אמרו
Amen.
יהי שמירה במבורך, לעולם ולעולמי עלמיה.
יתברך.
יתברך וישתבח, יתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, יתהדר ויתעלה shemid godasha
Brichu
leila min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata damiran v'halma v'yimeru
Amen.
Baruchu et Adonai hamevorach Baruch Adonai hamevorach leolam va'ed.
You may be seated. We continue on 228. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam yotzer or uverecho she'achos shalom uveret darkoho ha'me'ir la'aretz u'le'le'maleh b'rachamim u'tuvo mechadesh b'chol yom tamid ma'aseh bereshit marabu masach Adonai Eloheinu kulam b'chachma asita mela aretz kinyanecha titbarach Adonai Eloheinu al shvat masayadecha ve'al me'orei or she'asita yivru chasela or chadash al tzion ta'ir v'nizke kulanu mehereh le'oro baruch atah Adonai Yotzer HaMe'orohot.
Amen.
We turn to 230 for the paragraph of Ahava Rabbah, of great love. Ahava Rabbah Aftanu Adonai Eloheinu Chem Lagadola V'Terachem Lata Aleinu Ba'avor Avotenu V'Imotenu Shabbatu Becha V'Tamidem Chukei Chaim Ken Techanenu U'Tamidenu HaMerachem Rachem Aleinu V'Ten B'Libenu L'Havinu L'Haskil ולשמוע ללמוד וללמד ולשמור ולעשות ולקיים את כל דברי תלמוד תורתך באהבה. Gather us in peace from the four corners of the earth, and lead us upright to our land. For you, O God, work wonders. You chose us. Truly, you drew us near to your great name that we might acknowledge you, declaring you one in love. Praise be you, Adonai, who chooses your people Israel in love. Baruch atah Adonai habacher b'amo Yisrael b'ahava.
Amen.
We turn for Shema on 232.
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Please join me on page 234 for the chanting of Ve'ahavta. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha v'chol levavcha u'v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol me'odecha ve'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi metzavecha hayom al levavecha ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך וקשרתם נאות על ידיך והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. We continue in English on the middle of page 236. Adonai said to Moses as follows, "Speak to the Israelite people and instruct them to make for themselves fringes on the corners of their garments throughout the ages. Let them attach a cord of blue to the fringe at each corner. That shall be your fringe. Look at it and recall all the commandments of Adonai and observe them, so you do not follow your heart and eyes in your lustful urge. למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אמת.
אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. ויציב ואהוב וחביב ונורא ואדיר וטוב ויפה הדבר הזה עלינו לעולם ועד. האמת אלוהי עולם מלכנו צור יעקב מגן ישנו לדור ודור הוא קיים ושמו קיים וכיסא נכון ומלכותו ואמונתו לעד קיימת. ודרב חיים וקיימים נעבדים ונחמדים לעד עולמי עולמים ממצרים גאלתנו אדוני אלוהינו ומבית עבדים פדיתנו. על זאת שיבחו אהובים ורמו אל ונתנו ידידים זמירות, שירות ותשבחות, ברכות והודות למלך אל חי וקיים. רם ונישא הגדול ונורא, משפיע גאים ומגביה שפלים, מוציא השעירים ופודה ענבים ועוזר דלים, ועונה לעמו ישראל בעת שבתם אליו. תהילת לעליון ברוך ומברך, משה ומרים ובני ישראל לחנו שירה, בשמחה רבה ואמרו כולם. We turn to 240 for מי כמוך.
מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נהדר בקודש, מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נהדר בקודש, נורא תהילות עושה חדשה, שיבחו גאולים לשמך על שפת הים. שירה חדשה, שיבחו גאולים לשמך על שפת הים. יחד כולם הודו והמליכו ואמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. צור ישראל קומה בעזרת ישראל, ובטחנו ממך יהודה וישראל. גואלנו אדוני צבאות שמו, קדוש ישראל. ילאי לילאי, ילאי לילאי, ברוך אתה אדוני גואל ישראל.
We invite you guys and turn to page 242 for the Amidah.
אדוני שפתי תפתח ופי יגיד תהילתך. Adonai, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu, Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel ואלוהי לאה, האל הגדול, הגיבור והנורא, אל עליון, גומל חסדים טובים, וקונה הכל, וזוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה. מלך עוזר ומשיח ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם בעזרת שרה.
אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי מתים אתה רב להושיע, מוריד הטל, מלכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי מתים ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ברופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומדם אליו, מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישועה. ונאמן אתה לחיות מתים, ברוך אתה אדוני, מחיי המתים.
נקדש את שמך בעולם, כשם שמיים מקדישים אותו בשמי מרום, הכתוב על יד נביאך, וקרא זה ואמר, קדוש, 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוך על הארץ, כבודו. אדיר, אדירנו, אדוני, אדוננו, אדיר שמך בכל הארץ, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו. אחד הוא אלוהינו, הוא אבינו, הוא מלכנו, הוא מושיענו והוא ישמיענו, ברחמיו לעיני כל חי. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, ימלוך אדוני לעולם, אלוהיך ציון, לדור ודור. הללויה. לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש, ושבחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש. ישמחו מלכותך שומש על כל העולם. מעשה בראשית, אלוהינו ולא אבותינו במותינו. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. יעשה Shalom, Shalom Aleinu ועל כל ישראל. יעשה Shalom, יעשה Shalom, Shalom Aleinu ועל כל ישראל.
We turn to page 362 for Ein Kamocha, and we invite everyone to rise for the removal of the Torah from the ark.
אין כמוך באלוהים, אדוני, ואין כמעשיך, מלכותך מלכות כל עולמים, וממשלתך בכל דור ודור. אדוני מלך, אדוני מלך, אדוני ימלך לעולם ועד. אדוני יוסלם ייתן, אדוני יברך את עמו בשלום. כי מציון תצא תורה, כי מציון תצא תורה, ודבר אדוני מירושלים. ברוך שנתן תורה, תורה, ברוך שנתן תורה, תורה, לעמו ישראל בקדושתו. שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד. אחד אלוהינו, גדול אדוננו, קדוש שמו. גדלו לאדוני איתי, ונרוממה שמו יחדיו. לך אדוני, הגדולה והגבורה, והתפארת והנצח והאור. כי כה בשמיים ובארץ, לך אדוני הממלכה. והמתנשא לכל ראש. רוממו, רוממו, רוממו אדוני אלוהינו, והשתחוו להר קודשו. רוממו, רוממו, רוממו אדוני אלוהינו, והשתחוו להר קודשו. כי קדוש אדוני אלוהינו, כי קדוש אדוני אלוהינו.
You may be seated. Shabbat Shalom. Great to
Shabbat
be
Shalom.
here with you all this morning. So we have this week Parsha Pinchas. And among this Parsha, we get a series of seemingly disparate narratives of singular events that happened to the Jewish encampment as they are nearing their way towards the land of Israel, as Moses is starting to look for a predecessor of leadership. And our first story actually starts at the end of last week's Parsha, where we are introduced to a man named Pinchas, who is called by the words of the Torah a zealot for God. And among the stories of Pinchas and among some of the subsequent stories, what we end up seeing, what we get introduced to throughout these different narratives, are almost different archetypes or different types of ways in which either Jews can engage with Judaism and Jewish tradition, or really three different archetypes or ways that anybody can interact with any movement or ideology or community that they're a part of. So our first archetype, our first narrative is a man by the name of Pinchas. And the Torah doesn't tell us much about him, but he sees a Midianite woman, a woman who is coming from an outside tribe, and there's a series of people from Midian coming in, and they're trying to entice the Israelite men in sin. They're trying to entice them to sleep with them and probably subsequently get them to worship foreign gods. And as this is happening, as the Israelite leadership at the end of last week's Parsha is in sin, perhaps they have started worshiping idols, they've started taking Midianite women, everyone seemingly around the camp was sitting back in shock, not really knowing what to do. And all of a sudden, we're introduced to a man named Pinchas, who decides, for better or worse, to take the law into his own hands. And at the end of last week's Parsha, for those who want to follow along, we're in Numbers 25. It said, when Pinchas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, saw this, he left the assembly, taking a spear in hand, the Israelite into the chamber and stabbed them both, the Israelite and the woman through the belly. So this, of course, this extrajudicial killing gets somewhat of a mixed response among later Jewish commentaries, as one could imagine. On the one hand, it seems that God is actually happy with what Pinchas does, because in the beginning of this week's Parsha Pinchas, God actually welcomes Pinchas with open arms, and perhaps somewhat ironically, in the third verse of this week's Parsha, God actually says, Hineni noten lo et briti shalom. Here, I have established Pinchas as my man of peace. A somewhat ironic designation for somebody who just committed a double homicide. But if we take a step back from this narrative of Pinchas and actually explore what Pinchas represents, separate from the questionability of whether or not this extrajudicial killing was moral or good, what we see is the archetype of impassioned action. The zealot, somebody who for a movement, for an ideology, will go above and beyond. The second they see that their ideology, their community, or their tradition is perhaps under attack from the outside, they'll do whatever they can, sometimes for good, sometimes for bad, to ensure that their tradition, to ensure that their ideology can continue. So archetype 1, Pinchas. The next major story in this week's Parsha involves a completely different archetype of how to engage with a community. And here, if we are looking in the Torah, we are introduced in the beginning of Numbers chapter 27 to a family known as the daughters of Tzelophad. And here we're introduced to a man named Tzelophad who has 5 daughters and no sons. And unclear what exactly happened, but Tzelophad passes away. And at the time, the law among both the Torah and the wider regional communities in the area is that inheritance always passes through both the firstborn male, and if the firstborn male isn't there or has passed away, to any other male or son in the community. The only problem in this case is that the daughters of Tzelophad were 5 sisters, and they had no sons. And so when Moses started handing out the different regional areas to inherit, he skipped over the daughters of Tzelophad. And the Banot Tzelophad, as they're deemed in the Torah and subsequent Talmudic texts, are almost held up as the first great act of Jewish feminism. Because rightfully so, they approach Moshe and they say, hey, Moshe, the law of having sons inherit, perhaps that works in most cases, but actually in our case, it's not going to work. How is it going to be that if our father passes away, we have no land, we have no right to inheritance? What's going to happen? It doesn't make sense to have a community this way. And the Banot Tzelophad actually petition Moshe to the point where Moshe says, okay, let me check in with the boss, let me ask God. Moses goes and asks God, and God says, yeah, they are completely right. The Banot Tzelophad, they should be allowed to inherit land. And we see in the second archetype, unlike Pinchas, unlike the zealot who is willing to do whatever to protect the community, to protect the ideology, actually a second type of engagement, one of dissent, one of somebody within the community, perhaps if we're thinking about the Jewish community, someone within the Jewish community. If we're thinking about any other community, we can imagine the parallels there, who their engagement with the community actually leads them to challenge something about the community, subsequently attempting to make it better, both for them and for everyone else. The great Jewish tradition of engaging with Jewish tradition and community through questioning and through dissent. The third archetype we actually get in chapter 28 of Numbers, the end of this week's parsha, where seemingly we are given a laws of different offerings that when the Jews entered the land of Israel and set up the Beit HaMikdash, set up the temple, they would offer every single day. And we get to a verse that is actually the center of a fascinating Talmudic debate. And so the rabbis, as one can imagine rabbis do, are sitting around and someone asks the question, hey, what do you guys think is the most important verse in the Torah? And so you can imagine the different answers. I'm sure if we asked everyone here, we'd get as many answers as there are individuals in the room. One rabbi says, oh, it's of course Shema Yisrael. Another rabbi says, no, it's love your neighbor as yourself. A third says, no, it's humans were created in the image of God. And then one rabbi gets up, he turns to Numbers 28, the end of this week's parsha, and he says, no, it's this verse, Et hakeves hachad taseh baboker ve'et hakeves hasheni ta'aseh ben ha'arba'im. A lamb you shall offer every morning, and a lamb you shall offer every evening. Presumably much less exciting than all of the other strong ideological or moral statements. And so the other rabbis in the room, understandably, ask, hey, we're all quoting these very famous, very powerful verses. What does this have to do with, every morning bringing a lamb and every evening bringing a lamb? And the rabbis and subsequent commentaries respond, this is the idea of continuity, the idea of finding something that you're connected to and not just having it sit aside for a time where you feel a passion or not just engaging with it whenever you feel like, but actually feeling like you're connected and you're committed enough to something, a community, a tradition, or an ideal, that you're going to be there every single morning and every single afternoon to offer up this sacrifice, regardless of whether or not you're feeling inspired, regardless of whether or not you're feeling motivated. And actually, the Korban Tamid literally in Hebrew just means always or continuous, was seen as such an important ritual that actually, when the temple started to be breached and destroyed, the last thing that they held onto was the offering of this daily tamid. And we actually commemorated last Sunday the day of the cessation of the Korban Tamid with a traditional fast day known as Shivasar B'Tammuz. So we have three archetypes. We have Pinchas, the zealot, the person who's willing to do whatever for the community. Banot Salafchad, the people who engage with tradition through dissent, through arguing. And the archetype of the Korban Tamid, that of making sure to have something be continuous. So the obvious next question is, okay, well, which one is the ideal? And in thinking about this, what I found interesting is a community or an individual that only embodies one of these is probably not a community in which we'd want to be a part of. If we think about what Pinchas brings to the table with his zealotry, some might even say extremism, if we imagine a community only operating with this principle of we have an idea and we need to do whatever we can to protect this ideal, the ends always justify the means, that's probably not a community any of us would want to be a part of. Similarly, if we look to Banot Salafchad, if the only engagement one has with a community is through dissent, is through contradicting, if that's 100% of the time I'm engaged with Jewish tradition, I'm just talking about how it's broken, how it needs fixing, that's also probably not a community that we would want to be a part of. And similarly with the Korban Tamid, if Jewish practice gets to the point where it's so root that we don't have any inspiration, if we have no motivation behind what we're doing, if we're just showing up every morning, that's also not a community in which we would look towards. But what's interesting is if we actually combined all three of these archetypes, if we're actually able to bring in a little bit of each of this to our Jewish practice, we have the passion, we have the deep down commitment to our ideals, to our values, that if the time comes, if a situation arises where we need to be out in front and we need to take action, we know we have the inspiration. But we also have within our commitment a type of ability to dissent, an ability to question, always trying to make things better. So not completely being committed to zealously defending, but also not completely being committed to just arguing and pointing out problems, a mixture. And if we take those two ideas and then apply it to the last one, the commitment, the idea that we're going to show up week after week, day after day, these three archetypes fuse together to make a better both individual engagement with the Jewish community and I believe a better Jewish community towards the future. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
We invite Mark up to call people for the Aliyot.
No. Okay. We'll wait. There I am. Shabbat Shalom. Get my glasses out too. Yeah. Pinchas is found on page 1200, 1200, 1200. Yamdu, Herschel ben Avraham HaKohen, Aliyah Rishon, Henry Cohn, and reading will be Sarah Deland. Baruch Adonai Habarach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Adonai Habarach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher B'chabanu Mikol Ha'amim V'natan Lanu Et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai Notein HaTorah.
Amen.
Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aharon HaKohen, Heshiv et Chamati me'al b'nei Yisrael, V'kano et kinati b'tocham, V'lo chiliti et b'nei Yisrael, B'kinati, Lachen emor, Hineni noten lo et beriti shalom.
Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Natan Lanu Torat Emet V'chayei Olam Nota B'tochenu. Baruch Atah Adonai Notein HaTorah.
Atzeret.
Yamdu, Aliyah Sheni, Feivel ben Shlomo, Felix Levitz, and reading will be Mark Filowitz. No?
Reading will be needs.
No, do I have it wrong? You never. Okay.
Baruch et Adonai Hamvorah.
Baruch Adonai Mevarach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Adonai notein haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Vayitalo v'lezao acharav v'rit kechunat olam tachat asher kinei lelochav vayichaper al b'nei Yisrael v'shem ish Yisrael המוחה אשר הוכה את המדיינים זמרי בן סילחו נשיא בית אב לשמעוני בשם האישה ומוכח המדיינים כזנו עצור ראש אומות בני אב במדיין הוא.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר נתן לנו תורת אמת וחיים עולם נוטע בתוכנו ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Amen. Yasher Koach. A correction, I started us off on the wrong page. We're not on 1,200, we're on page 1,194. Second column. Yamdu, Yamdu. Aliyah HaShlishi. Malka Bat Chorhe. Mila Serlin, and reading will be Nitza Hennig.
Baruch Adonai Mevarach Leolam Vahed.
Baruch Adonai Hamavarach Leolam Vayed. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Hamim Venatan Lanu Et Torato. Baruch Ata Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen.
וידבר אדוני אל משה לאמור, צרור את המדיינים והכיתם אותם, כי צוררים הם לכם בנכליהם, אשר נקלו לכם על דבר פאור ועל דבר כסבי, בת נשיא מדיין אחותם, המוכה ביום המגפה, על דבר פאור.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר נתן לנו תורת אמת וחיי עולם נוטע בתוכנו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Amen.
Yasher Koach.
Oh. It looks like Rabbi Miriam's got it. Never mind. Thank you. Bill.
Yamdu, Yamdu. Maftir, Seidel, Rivka, Bat, Shmuel, Valea, Leila Pesner, and reading will be Cantorial Fellow Gabriel Newman.
I just got my stitches out yesterday, so I will be reading Torah from a seated position this morning.
Okay.
Baruch Adonai Mevarach Leolam Vahed. Amen. Vayom hashmini atzeret tihye lachem kol melechet avodah lo ta'asu v'hikravtem olah ishe re'ach nichoach Adonai parechad ayil echad Kevasim b'nei shana shivat mimim minchatam v'nizkehem lapar la'ayil v'lakvasim b'misparam kamishpat us'ir hatat echad milvad olad hatamid uminchata v'niskam ele תעשו לאדוני במועדיכם, לבד מנדריכם ונדבותיכם, לעולותיכם ולמנחותיכם, ולנזקיכם ולשלמיכם. ויאמר משה אל בני ישראל, ככל אשר ציווה אדוני את משה.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר נתן לנו תורת אמת וחיי עולם נטע בתוכנו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
אמן.
We turn to page 371 for the Mishuberach for all who received Aliyot and everyone who participated in the Torah reading service. Mishuberach Avotenu v'Imotenu, Avraham, Yitzchak v'Yakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel v'Leah, Hu yavarech et kol ha'olim ba'avor sha'alu l'chvod ha'makom, l'chvod ha'Torah b'schar zeh HaKadosh Baruch Hu yishmerehu v'yatzilenu mikol tzara u'tzuka, u'mikol nega u'mlacha v'yishlach bracha v'hatzlacha b'chol maseh yadehem, Im Kol Yisrael v'Na'am Mahar. Amen. Before we recite the Mishuberach for healing, we take a moment and invite people to think about, to whisper, or to comment the names of those this Shabbat who are in need of healing of any kind. Mishuberach Avotenu v'Imotenu, Avraham, Yitzchak v'Yakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel v'Leah, Hu yavarech et kol ha'cholim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yimalei Rachamim Alehem Lachmilam Urefuatam Ulahachzikam Vishlach Melahem Meira Refuah Shalema Min HaShamayim Refuat HaNefesh Verefuat HaGuf Hashra Bagala Uzman Kariv V'no Mahar. Amen. We invite you all to rise for the lifting of the Torah.
Vezot HaTorah Asher Sam Moshe לפני בני ישראל אבי אדוני ביד משה.
Turn to page 586 for Aleinu.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש Baruch ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו
We invite everyone to turn to page 598 for the Mourner's Kaddish, and we especially keep in mind anyone in our community who is in any type of mourning this Shabbat. Please join me for Mourner's Kaddish. Yitgadal, Yitkadash, Shemei Rabbah,
Amen.
B'yamadi, Barach, Chirtei, V'yamlich, Malchutei, B'chayechon, U'yomechon, U'v'chayei Tocho Beit Yisrael, Ba'agala u'bizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehi shmei rabbah mevarach le'olam omei omaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. V'yithadar v'yitale v'yithalal shmei kedusha b'richu. Le'ela min kol bechata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechemata. Ta'amiran be'ama v'imru amen. Yehi shalom rabbah min shemaya. וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל, אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום, עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו amen. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It's been great to be here with you all this Shabbat. Welcome to everyone who joined us in person, on Zoom, on YouTube, and on Facebook. A couple quick announcements. We are back in person for Shabbat mornings, so anybody who would like to come join either for Torah study at 9 or services at 10, feel free. The only upcoming event is in 2 weeks. It is Tisha B'Av, 2 weeks from Saturday night, and we'll be having a TBT communal Havdalah. More information to come out probably this week. And in honor of 4th of July, we finish with This Land is Your Land.
This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. As I went walking that ribbon of highway, I saw above me that endless skyway, and saw below me that golden valley. This land was made for you and me. This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. Shabbat Shalom,
Shabbat Shalom.
everyone. And have a wonderful, happy, safe 4th of July. And Zoomers, if you would like to stay on and chat, please do so. We'll fade to black and then be right back like we do. Everybody else on Facebook and YouTube.